Elvis Presley gathered his family at Graceland just 18 hours before his death and revealed a secret he had never told anyone. He cried so hard that his daughter Lisa Marie had never seen her father like this before. What Elvis said that night would change his family's lives forever. It was August 15th, 1977, and something was terribly wrong at Graceland. Elvis had been acting strangely all week, but that evening was different. He had asked his father Vernon, his girlfriend Ginger Alden, and his 9-year-old daughter Lisa Marie to meet him in the living room after dinner. The mansion felt unusually quiet, almost as if the walls themselves knew something momentous was about to happen. Before we dive deeper into this heartbreaking story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the incredible revelations about what really happened in Elvis's final hours. Elvis sat in his favorite chair, the same one where he had made countless phone calls to friends and fans over the years. But tonight, his hands were shaking, and his famous blue eyes were already rimmed with tears before he had spoken a single word. Lisa Marie would later recall that she had never seen her father look so vulnerable, so completely broken. Vernon noticed it too. In all his years watching his son become the king of rock and roll, he had never seen Elvis this emotionally fragile. What happened next would haunt the Presley family for decades. Elvis began to speak, his voice barely above a whisper, about something he had been carrying alone for nearly 20 years. The weight of this secret had been eating at him, consuming him from the inside. And now, as if he somehow knew his time was running out, he finally found the courage to share the truth. The room was so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Ginger sat on the arm of Elvis's chair, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. Vernon leaned forward in his seat, concern etched across his weathered face. Lisa Marie, too young to fully understand the gravity of the moment, sensed that something important was happening and sat perfectly still on the carpet near her father's feet. Elvis cleared his throat and began to speak about a time most people never knew about, his secret life during his army service in Germany. What he revealed that night would explain so much about his behavior in recent years, his increasing isolation, his growing dependence on prescription medication, and his frequent mentions of regret and lost opportunities. The secret Elvis revealed that night traced back to 1958 during his army service in Germany. While stationed in Bad Nauheim, Elvis had received a letter that would change everything he thought he knew about himself and his purpose in life. The letter was from a young woman named Maria Hoffman, a German girl who claimed to be carrying his child. Elvis had met Maria during his off-duty hours in a small cafe near the base. She was different from the screaming fans who followed him everywhere, quiet, thoughtful, and seemingly unimpressed by his fame. They had spent several evenings talking about music, about life, about dreams that seemed impossible to reach. Elvis had felt more like himself with Maria than he had with anyone since becoming famous. The relationship had developed slowly, built on genuine conversation rather than the superficial interactions Elvis was used to. Maria spoke broken English, but her eyes conveyed more than words ever could. She was studying to become a teacher and had dreams of traveling to America someday. Elvis found himself looking forward to their meetings, to the few hours each week when he could simply be Aaron, the boy from Tupelo, rather than Elvis Presley, the international sensation. But when Maria told him she was pregnant, Elvis panicked. Not because he didn't care about her, but because he knew what the scandal would do to his career, to his family, to everything he had worked so hard to build. The colonel, his manager, had made it clear that any hint of scandal could destroy everything. So Elvis made a decision that would torment him for the rest of his life. He sent Maria money through a third party and never saw her again. The decision had been made in a moment of fear and confusion. Elvis was only 23 years old, thrust into a level of fame that no one his age had ever experienced. The pressure from the colonel, the expectations from his family, the weight of supporting so many people, it all came crashing down when he learned about Maria's pregnancy. He convinced himself that sending money was the right thing to do, that it would provide for the child while protecting everyone involved from the media circus that would surely follow. For 19 years, Elvis had wondered about that child. Was it really his? Was it a boy or a girl? Did the child know who their father was? Did Maria hate him for abandoning them? The questions plagued him during sleepless nights, during lonely moments between concerts, during the quiet hours when the crowds went home and Elvis was left alone with his thoughts. Have you ever carried a secret so heavy that it physically hurt to keep it inside? Elvis lived with this pain every single day, and it was slowly destroying him. The weight of this secret had influenced every major decision in Elvis's life since 1958. His reluctance to commit fully to relationships, his increasing reliance on prescription drugs to sleep, his obsession with control over his public image. All of it traced back to that moment in Germany when he had chosen his career over his heart. 3 days before his death, Elvis received another letter that would shatter what remained of his peace of mind. It was from Maria Hoffman's sister, writing from Germany with news that Maria had died in a car accident 2 weeks earlier. But that wasn't the devastating part. The devastating part was what came next. Maria had indeed given birth to Elvis's son in 1959. The boy, named Klaus Hoffman, had grown up believing his father was a local musician who had died before his birth. Klaus had inherited his father's musical talent and had been performing in small clubs across Germany, never knowing that his real father was the most famous entertainer in the world. The letter included details about Klaus's life that broke Elvis's heart all over again. The boy had been exceptionally talented, not just in music but in academics as well. He had learned to play guitar at age 7, the same age Elvis had received his first guitar. Klaus had written his own songs, performed at local festivals, and had dreams of making it big in the music industry. Teachers described him as charismatic and naturally gifted, with a smile that could light up a room, descriptions that could have been written about young Elvis. But here's where the story becomes even more heartbreaking. Klaus had been diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia at age 16 and had spent the last 2 years of his life in and out of hospitals. According to Maria's sister, Klaus had discovered the truth about his parentage just months before his death. He had found letters from Elvis hidden in his mother's belongings, along with photographs and the money Elvis had sent over the years. The discovery had shocked Klaus. All his life, he had wondered why he felt different, why music came so naturally to him, why strangers sometimes said he reminded them of someone famous. Learning that Elvis Presley was his father explained everything, but it also raised new questions. Why had his father never visited? Why had he never tried to make contact? Did Elvis even know he existed? Klaus had written to Elvis, but the letters had been intercepted by the Colonel's people, who were under strict instructions to filter out any potentially damaging correspondence. The Colonel had built an entire system around protecting Elvis from what he called extortion attempts and paternity claims. Any letter that mentioned children, relationships, or money was automatically discarded without Elvis ever seeing it. Klaus had died believing that his father, the king of rock and roll, had ignored his desperate pleas for contact. He had died thinking that Elvis didn't want to know him, that he was an embarrassment, a mistake that the famous singer wanted to forget. The sister's letter included copies of Klaus's unsent letters to Elvis, along with photographs of the young man who bore a striking resemblance to his famous father. Reading those letters, seeing those photographs, learning that his son had died believing himself rejected and unloved, it broke something inside Elvis that could never be repaired. In his letters, Klaus had written about his music, about his dreams, about his illness, and about his desperate desire to meet his father just once. He had written about watching Elvis's movies and concerts on television, wondering if Elvis ever thought about him. He had written about his mother's stories of their time together in Germany, about how she had never stopped loving Elvis despite everything. The final letter Klaus had attempted to send was dated just 2 weeks before his death. In it, he had written, "Dear Father, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I forgive you for not being there. I understand that being Elvis Presley must be very difficult, and maybe having a son like me would only make it harder. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud to be your son, even if you're not proud of me. I hope someday you'll think of me and know that I loved you." As Elvis shared this story with his family that August evening, the tears came in waves. He had pulled out a manila envelope he had been carrying since receiving the sister's letter, and with shaking hands, he showed them the photographs of Klaus. The resemblance was unmistakable, the same eyes, the same smile, the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking. Vernon was shocked into silence. He had known his son was troubled, but he had never imagined anything like this. The elder Presley felt a complex mix of emotions: grief for the grandson he had never known, anger at the colonel for intercepting the letters, and deep sadness for the pain his son had been carrying alone for so many years. Ginger held Elvis as he sobbed, feeling the full weight of his anguish. She had sensed that Elvis was carrying some deep hurt, but she had never imagined the scope of his secret. As she listened to him talk about Klaus, she began to understand so many things about Elvis that had puzzled her: his occasional distant stares, his comments about missed opportunities, his sometimes obsessive concern for Lisa Marie's well-being. But it was Lisa Marie's reaction that cut the deepest. At 9 years old, she couldn't fully understand the complexity of the situation, but she could see that her father was in tremendous pain. She had climbed into his lap as he cried, her small hands trying to wipe away his tears. "Daddy," she had asked innocently, "why are you so sad? Can't we go see him?" Elvis had to explain, through his tears, that Klaus was gone, that her half-brother, whom she would never meet, had died, believing that Elvis didn't love him. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Elvis's life. He tried to help Lisa Marie understand why he had made the choices he had, why sometimes adults make decisions that seem right at the time, but turn out to be terribly wrong. Elvis told his family about the fear that had driven his decision in 1958. He talked about the pressure from the colonel, about the concerns for his mother Gladys, about the terror of losing everything he had worked for. But now, 19 years later, with the wisdom that comes from experience and loss, he could see how wrong he had been. "I was so worried about protecting my career that I forgot to protect what really mattered," Elvis said through his tears. "I let fear make my decisions for me, and now my son is gone, and he died thinking I didn't love him." What made the situation even more tragic was the timing. Elvis had been planning to make changes in his life. He had been talking about firing the colonel, about taking more control over his career, about being more present for his daughter. Learning about Klaus's death made him realize how many opportunities he had lost, how many people he had failed to protect while trying to protect his image. Elvis spent that entire night writing a letter to Maria's sister, apologizing for the pain his absence had caused Klaus, explaining how the letters had been kept from him, expressing his deep regret for not being the father Klaus had needed. He wrote about his own childhood, about his dreams for Klaus, about the music they might have made together. He wrote until his hand cramped and his eyes burned, pouring out nearly 20 years of suppressed love and regret onto paper. He never got the chance to send it. The next morning, August 16th, 1977, Elvis seemed different. Those who saw him that day said he appeared both peaceful and deeply sad, as if he had finally let go of something that had been weighing him down. He spent extra time with Lisa Marie, holding her close and telling her repeatedly how much he loved her. He called several old friends, not to chat about current events, but to tell them how important their friendship had meant to him over the years. Elvis woke up earlier than usual that morning, around 7 a.m., which was uncharacteristic for someone who typically slept until afternoon. Ginger found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the Graceland grounds. When she asked if he was all right, he had simply said, "I'm thinking about my boy." Throughout the morning, Elvis made a series of phone calls that, in retrospect, seemed like final conversations. He called his longtime friend Red West, despite their recent estrangement, to tell him there were no hard feelings. He called his cousin Billy Smith to reminisce about their childhood in Tupelo. He called his hairdresser and friend Larry Geller to talk about spirituality and the meaning of life. Most significantly, Elvis called his lawyer to discuss setting up a foundation for children with cancer. He wanted to establish something in Germany specifically, something that would help kids who were fighting the same disease that had taken Klaus. When asked why Germany specifically, Elvis had simply said it was something he needed to do for someone very important to him. Dr. George Nikopoulos, Elvis's personal physician, would later say that Elvis seemed to be saying goodbye, though no one understood the significance at the time. During their conversation that afternoon, Elvis had asked Dr. Nick about pain, not physical pain, but emotional pain. "How long can a person carry guilt before it kills them?" Elvis had asked. The question seemed odd at the time, but would take on new meaning after Elvis's death. Elvis also spent considerable time that day organizing his personal papers. He gathered photographs, letters, and mementos that he wanted Lisa Marie to have when she got older. Among these items was the manila envelope containing Klaus's photographs and letters. He wrote a note to Lisa Marie explaining who Klaus was and asking her to someday visit his grave in Germany. Around noon that day, Elvis retreated to his bathroom with a book, something he often did when he needed to think. But this time was different. The weight of his secret, the guilt over Klaus, the realization of all the ways his fame had cost him the things that truly mattered, it had all become too much to bear. Elvis had brought with him not just a book, but also the unfinished letter to Maria's sister and the photographs of Klaus. Those who found him later said it appeared he had been reading Klaus's letters one more time, trying to understand the son he had never known. What Klaus's story taught Elvis in those final hours was that fame and fortune mean nothing if they cost you your humanity. All the #1 hits, all the sold-out concerts, all the adoration of millions of fans, none of it could ease the pain of knowing that his son had died feeling unloved and abandoned. When Elvis was found that evening, he was still holding the photographs of Klaus. The manila envelope with the letters was on the bathroom counter, along with the unfinished letter he had been writing to Maria's sister. The Presley family kept this story private for decades, understanding that Elvis had spent his entire life trying to protect them from the harsh realities of his fame. Vernon was the first to find the letter Elvis had been writing to Maria's sister. In it, Elvis had poured out his heart, expressing regret, love, and a desperate wish that he could turn back time. He had written about Klaus with the pride of a father, describing the young man's talent and character based on what he had learned from the sister's letter. He had written about his own failures, his cowardice, and his deep regret for choosing fear over love. The letter also contained Elvis's plans for honoring Klaus's memory. He had wanted to establish a music scholarship in Klaus's name, to create a foundation that would help sick children pursue their artistic dreams, and to personally visit Maria's grave to pay his respects to the woman he had loved and abandoned. It wasn't until 1997, 20 years after Elvis's death, that Vernon finally shared parts of this story with Elvis biographer Peter Guralnick. Even then, he asked that certain details be kept confidential out of respect for the families involved. Vernon had struggled with whether to share the story at all, knowing that Elvis had spent his life trying to protect his privacy. But he also felt that people deserved to understand the pain his son had carried, the human cost of fame, and the decisions it forced upon those who achieved it. The full truth about Klaus Hoffmann didn't emerge until 2010, when Maria's sister, then in her 80s, decided to share her correspondence with Elvis. She wanted the world to know that Elvis had tried to make amends in his final hours, that he had never intended to abandon his son, and that the young man she had helped raise was indeed the child of the king of rock and roll. The revelation sparked international interest and led to a DNA test using preserved samples. The results confirmed what everyone already knew from the photographs. Klaus was indeed Elvis's son. The news brought both closure and renewed grief to the Presley family, who had spent decades wondering about the brother and uncle they had never known. Lisa Marie, now an adult, traveled to Germany to visit Klaus's grave and meet Maria's sister. The meeting was emotional and healing for both women. Lisa Marie was able to learn about her half-brother, to see more photographs, and to hear stories about his personality and talents. Maria's sister was able to meet Klaus's family, to see that he would have been loved and welcomed if circumstances had been different. The Klaus Hoffmann story adds a tragic dimension to our understanding of Elvis's final years. It explains his increasing isolation, his growing dependence on prescription medication, and his frequent mentions of regret and lost opportunities. Elvis wasn't just struggling with the pressures of fame, he was carrying the unbearable weight of knowing he had failed as a father to a child he had never had the chance to know. Today, there's a small memorial in Bad Nauheim, Germany, where Klaus is buried. Fans have placed Elvis memorabilia there, and someone, presumably Maria's family, maintains fresh flowers year-round. It has become an unofficial pilgrimage site for Elvis fans who know the story, a place to remember not just the king of rock and roll, but the father who carried a broken heart to his grave. The headstone bears a simple inscription, Klaus Hoffmann, 1959 to 1977, beloved son and musician. His father's voice lives on in his memory. Below that, someone has added, the King's Lost Prince. What do you think about this hidden chapter of Elvis's life? Did you know about Klaus Hoffmann before watching this video? How do you think Elvis's life might have been different if he had known about Klaus earlier? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The story of Elvis and Klaus reminds us that behind every public figure is a private person dealing with private pain. Elvis Presley may have been the king of rock and roll, but he was also a man who made mistakes, who carried regrets, and who understood too late that some things matter more than fame and fortune. Fame can be a blessing, but it can also be a prison. For Elvis, the very success that made him a legend also created barriers that prevented him from being the father his son needed. In his final hours, facing his own mortality, Elvis finally understood what truly mattered. Unfortunately for Klaus, that understanding came too late. The tragedy of Elvis and Klaus is not just about a father and son who never met. It's about the cost of fame, the price of perfection, and the way that fear can make us abandon the very things that give life meaning. Elvis spent his career bringing joy to millions of people around the world, but he was never able to bring that same joy to the son who needed it most. If this story of love, loss, and regret moved you, please subscribe for more untold stories about music's greatest legends. Hit that notification bell and share this video with someone who understands that behind every great artist is a human being with a story worth telling.